Thank you for listening to the Lending Thoughts podcast, sponsored by Rocket Pro. I'm your host, Bekim. And as a guest today, I have Tom Hall, who is the founder of BluMortgage. We have an awesome conversation, and it's so good that we actually decided to cross-interview each other on each other's podcast. So once you're done listening to this, I highly recommend going to check out Mortgage Tech Talks, which is Tom's podcast as well. But Tom and I dive into the topics of AI, of course, because I can't resist. We also talk about how to implement some good CRM habits as a mortgage broker and agent early on in your business to gain a leg up on the industry. And we talk about the industry and consumer experience overall so that you can run a better business. You're not going to want to miss this. Have a listen today. Hey, Tom, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, great to be here.
Absolutely. So like to start out with a question that tells the audience a little bit about you. If you could please tell us your life story in 60 seconds or less.
All right. You got the clock going?
You're on.
Here we go. I'll try to keep it simple. Grew up in a small town, about 5,000 people. I had a twin sister, which kind of kept things quite competitive throughout my entire childhood, which I'm thankful for now. Went to school for engineering, never did it. Went right into consulting, which we were just chatting about. I did that for 3-4 years, traveling around, helping big companies do things. Got kind of sick of that traveling around. That was 2019. And then my good friend Massimo was working on CRM stuff. And I said, hey, that seems kind of interesting. And I jumped on at that time, 2019. That's when we launched BluMortgage, and been doing that ever since. It's been a fun ride and time.
Very cool. So
yeah.
What is BluMortgage?
Well, the punchline is we are CRM for Canadian mortgage brokers. We've grown it now to be, we call it the top independent, and we can get into independence and what that all means, I'm sure, but the top kind of independent CRM in Canada right now for brokers. You know, this idea of CRM, I think does get convoluted sometimes. Some people think it's just newsletters, which it can be, but CRM does a bunch of things, right? It's ultimately kind of a hub. It's kind of your second brain in a sense of really you can run most processes, or our most successful brokers, I should say, run a lot of their business processes through it. So lead management, deal flow, live deal flow, and of course, staying in touch with clients afterwards. But even, partner management, realtor management, a whole bunch can happen in there. So it's a database, it's a place to store information, and a place to automate things coming out of that.
Great. And who's your core client as you think about it? Like when you guys go to market, who are you trying to get in conversations with to say, hey, we have a product and we think it helps?
Yeah, I think it's evolved over the years. It's one of those things where, when we kind of launched, we were naive and we just said, yeah, any mortgage broker, what do you mean? Anybody can use us. And I think that's still the case. But, I think in the tech world, people are obsessed with this concept of product market fit, right? I'm sure you've heard of that. And I think where that product market fit is most for us is, it doesn't have to be big producers. I mean, we do have quite a few. I have 3 of the top 5 producers in Canada using BluMortgage right now, but it's more for people who want to scale, who want to grow, right? Doesn't matter where they're at now, but are looking at themselves and their business and saying, hey, I do want to grow. I do want to build a team, and I do want to build processes and systems that'll help me get there. And that's really, really where we have a really strong product market fit.
Gotcha. So the way to think about it is like a great individual producer wants to grow a team or wants to grow their own business, and running a loosey-goosey process becomes problematic as your volume starts to grow. Now you need to systematize your business to make it scalable and repeatable. And that's where somebody like BluMortgage comes in and says, like, hey, here's the prescription, or maybe even to ask you that as a question, is it like, here's the prescription, or is it more diagnostic in that you're going like, tell me what your process is and I will build you a custom CRM for your business to systematize things that you want to do to take care of your clients the way that you want to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to the first part of your question, that's exactly right. And, you talk about that loosey-goosey, starting point, I think a lot of people start at. And I think actually that's like super necessary to start.
Yeah.
Right. I always say, you got to be able to take that phone call at 10 p.m. and just drag that deal over the finish line. I think that's absolutely essential. That's such an important skill. And, some people are good with that. Some people like the chaos. Some people like, yeah, whatever, I'm going to take that, whatever, I'm going to be running around and doing that. And I'm great at it. And that's good. And that's for them. But yeah, where Blue kind of really kicks in is when those people say, okay, I've done this for X period of time. It was what I needed to do at the time, but now I want to shift. And I think it is a mindset shift. I think it requires that mindset shift to say, no, I'm not going to be doing that anymore. I do want to scale. I do want to get things repetitive, whether I'm bringing on a team or not. I want to get the scale to do that. And so, yeah, take some of these processes or redefine some of these processes to fit it into a system to allow me to build up from there. So, yeah, I think that's right. And then in terms of the prescriptive versus diagnostic approach, again, it's similar to what I was saying earlier, where it kind of evolved over time, where when we started, if I go back to 2018, 2019, when I was first kind of chatting with Massimo, hey, do I kind of jump in here and help what you're doing over in the CRM side? At that time, Massimo was completely doing the diagnostic. Like, we didn't even have a system. Like, we were just working with like Salesforce and HubSpot and some of these, and he would just come in. He worked with some big names like, I don't know if you know Butler Mortgage. A lot of people know that name. Yeah, for better, for worse. We know Ron well, of course. But yeah, so he'd come in and just say, what are you doing? What's going on here? And build the system around it. Yeah, and so that's where it started. But he did that many, many times. And it got to a point to say, okay, well, I've done the diagnostic so many times, but the prescription's always the same. Right? If I'm continuing the prescription analogy of, hey, take this medicine and get lots of rest, the medicine's always the same. Maybe it's rest for one person, maybe it's lots of water for the next person. Again, bear with me for this analogy, but the point I'm getting at is we realized what was consistent, and that's what BluMortgage came to be, right? Which is the medicine piece. When we do the diagnostic, what is always consistent? Let's give that out of the box. Let's have that as a product. That's really what we've gone to market with. And then all the other pieces around it, we can give that advice. We have webinars, and we have also partners, people who will come in and help people do these types of things. But that's become actually less of our business. We're focusing, again, and it kind of comes back to very much so like a broker's journey, going from loosey-goosey to more systematized. That's what we did for BluMortgage. When you're doing more diagnostic, it's different for every person. So you're trying to figure it out. We wanted to get to a place where, hey, if we're always prescribing the same medicine, well, we can really build a process and a product around it. And so that's how we've evolved our business.
Right. So it's part prescriptive, part customized for the individual to say, like, here it is in its base form. If you want to take it to another level, here's some other things that you could do in building it in such a way. That's really interesting. As you told your story there, it's starting to make more sense for me, like going back to like the engineering and consulting background. How has that background helped you into building CRMs? For example, I'm, originally from the Detroit area, built around auto, everything's assembly line. And in many ways, a lot of what I learned at Rocket in the early days is that a mortgage process can be like an assembly line if you design it that way. So how much do you think that background has led you into the success that you're having at BluMortgage today?
Yeah, I mean, it's good. Yeah, the engineering side of things, I never used it. I ended up doing a couple internships at some oil and gas companies and said, maybe not for me. But it sticks with you, right? It's also a way of thinking. I think engineering is. I think it's the art of problem solving in a sense. And I think that's a lot of consulting as well. But I think what it came down to in both of those cases, or I guess in both of those experiences, then translating into BluMortgage, really is building those processes. I was able to kind of come in and look at, if I'm looking at what Massimo was doing, which was a bit more diagnostic, a bit more loosey-goosey at the moment, and say, okay, well, what can be repeated? What can be processitized, if that's a word? What can be repeatable? Because I think when you get something that can repeat, that's when you can, bring in staff to help you with it. That's when you can bring in, automations that can just, hey, I'm doing the same thing over and over again. Why couldn't a computer just do this? And so, having that problem solving mindset and being able to be, very objective when analyzing a process, I think that allows us to, first of all, of course, build BluMortgage to address all those types of things, kind of apply the same mindset. But even in our business ourselves, we are able to also apply that, right? To say, okay, in the way we go to market, in the way that we position BluMortgage, we're also able to build processes around that, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. If I'm a mortgage broker I mean, you must have learned so much now through the years about mortgage broker processes. What
Mm.
are maybe 2 to 3 things that when you look at a mortgage broker's business, like if you're not doing, A, B, and C,
Mm.
you're crazy. This is sort of like the
You're crazy.
core of
Yeah.
what you need to be doing to actually run a successful business that's repeatable. Few things that you might be able to share there.
First and foremost, when we talk about, these processes and these types of things, I think that it is important to separate, a process from a system, right? And so, well, what do I mean by that? Well, the system, and in this case, when I'm referring to the system, maybe being the CRM, helps you achieve the process, but there's still different things, right? So a lot of times, people sign up for BluMortgage and say, hey, yeah, I'd love to, stay in touch, with my clients. Can you help me do that? And we say, sure. But, we say, okay, well, what's your client journey? And they kind of look at us and say, well, aren't you supposed to tell me that? And, it's that back and forth. And, you can have different opinions on it. But the point really for us is to say, well, the client journey almost should be separate. And all BluMortgage is doing is helping you execute on it. I almost say, the best brokers that we see out there, they have their client journey, but it's just a Google Doc, right? It's just like this thing where they just say, hey, the very first thing that I do when I get a referral, I always send, this template, and I've written it out. And then I always follow up in 2 days. And it's literally written, like not even a concept of how I'm going to execute on this. That's maybe a tomorrow problem. But today I'm just going to go point by point, step by step, touch point by touch point, and just write it out. How do I want to interact with the client? And that becomes first. And that's maybe the answer to your question, or the first example I can think of is, I think every mortgage broker and all the successful ones I know, they all have that written out, like, Google Doc or however they like to do it. This is how I interact with my clients. And I give it to every single team member. This is how we interact. So I'm using BluMortgage today, and this is helping me execute against that. But if tomorrow, maybe for whatever reason, I switch to the next system, or hey, there's this brand new fancy AI thing that comes out that blows everyone out of the water and BluMortgage becomes irrelevant, well, I still have this backbone, this process that exists that's not going to change, because this is how I run my business and this is how I interact with my clients. So I think that's the first one I would think of, at least.
Yeah. I mean, that's super helpful.
Yeah.
I can't resist my, willingness to jump into an AI conversation with you. So since you said it, I'll take you there. Where are some places, given that you stay pretty close to the technology side of the mortgage business, where are some places that you think are natural fits for AI as some of these models develop in time?
Yeah. I opened the AI rabbit hole, but always happy to jump down here. But honestly, right now, I don't know, actually, and I can guess and I can speculate, and I think that's useful to do. But I think for me, my position right now is, I think we're just so early. Like, we're just insanely early in this AI, I guess you'd say, journey. And, one point that I made recently that maybe I'll make now is, I don't even think we know, what AI is even going to look like. And the example I give is, I remember when, like, phones first came out, like phones that had, internet on them, smartphones. Everyone came and was like, oh, this is amazing. This is going to be great. We're going to be able to, open up web pages on our phones. And that was true. And that was great. And that was useful. And that's, I feel like, where we're kind of at with AI right now, of trying to fit AI into like an existing modality, or trying to say, hey, we can do what we did somewhere else just through this lens of AI. But if you continue the mobile analogy for a second, you say, well, yes, you could do that. Yes, you could load a web page on your mobile device. That was great. But the real unlock, the real interesting thing was when the App Store came out, right? When, you could, have these standalone apps where you could play games on your phone, with the, accelerometer, and you could press things, you could do things, and Instagram and, Uber and all these things that wouldn't have even made sense on a desktop. Right. So, I think just like that, mobile enabled new things that we couldn't even conceptualize. I think AI is going to do that, is that in 5 years, we're going to be looking back and saying, wow, yeah, this is completely different than the way we used to do things. And I think, at least in this moment right now, we're trying to force AI in all of our existing platforms. How does AI help, maybe this software product, right, that I'm using on my desktop? Or how does AI help, this other thing that I'm using on my mobile device? And I think it's going to be completely different, right? Like, I think it could be, we're using these AI tools in ways we couldn't even conceptualize. So all that to say, I guess, I don't want to make any strong proclamations one way or the other, because I think we're just so early and so naive in what this thing can do. But with that said, I mean, obviously there are some areas that seem interesting. I think for one, generative AI is going to be helpful in hyper contextualized conversations, right? Being able to, reach out to clients. I think that right now we're in an era in mortgage world where I say we're going from transactions to trust, right? A broker's job used to be maybe more processing transactions. Now it's about being a trusted advisor. So we're going from transactions to trust. And I think having contextualized interactions really builds trust. And I think AI can help that. So, instead of reaching out to a client and, just saying happy birthday, being able to look at all the interactions you've ever had with that client and formulate something super contextualized for them, and being able to put that in a birthday message as a simple example. I think that's something interesting. And then the other one I think is also obviously in underwriting. This will come to, actually really access to data ultimately. But if you can use AI to, analyze big sets of data, underwriting becomes, I wouldn't say easier. Easier is maybe not the right word, but, it's a new paradigm shift, right? If these big computers can, do things very quickly with large sets of data, we enter a kind of a different era in terms of underwriting, I think, right? I guess, of course, it all depends, but those are some areas that seem interesting to me.
I appreciate that. So, what are some things that you think a mortgage agent should be implementing moving forward based on what you're seeing in the market right now? I think a lot of people are thinking about the future when it comes to AI. They want to make sure that they're sitting on technology stacks, at least your technology forward agents and brokers, to take advantage of these things, because if you're not built from the ground up to implement any of these things into your process, they are borderline useless. You can go to the web version of ChatGPT all you want and say, how would you respond to this email and whatnot? But if instead you got the email from the client, it was logged into your CRM, and then it just auto-populated a suggested email response to the client.
And you can click yes.
That you're like, click yes if you want to hit send. You're like, huge time saver, right? But like, what should folks be thinking about as they build a foundation of their business?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think any system, when I go into the CRM and someone, signs up for the first time, what are the components of a CRM? What are the two most essential things? It's, the features, so what it can do, but then it's also the data. So what's it going to do it on, right? What's the basis? And okay, yes, it can do, respond to a nice email, but, the client needs to be in there in the first place in order to even enable that. What does that kind of lead me to? It's to say, okay, well, for anyone who's forward looking, and I just talked about big data maybe on the underwriting side, but I think it applies anywhere. I mean, I think these AI systems, they live off data, right? It's like oxygen to them. And anyone who's, gone to ChatGPT and gotten, a bad response or a hallucination, as they call it, that's usually a result of maybe some bad data. So I think that anybody looking forward needs to kind of realize, I think, that data is going to be more and more important. Data is really going to be king in this world of AI. And so, first of all, get your data super clean. I know so many brokers who just kind of have maybe a spreadsheet with, half updated. Yeah, I'll get to it when I get to it. I don't think that's going to be as optional anymore. So having it super clean, super up to date, so that, hey, when, this revolutionary AI comes along, you can just apply it, versus spending months and months trying to clean up your data while the forward-looking brokers are already, off to the moon with these new types of tools. So getting clean data. And then also the other side of it is also the ownership side of things, right? In the broker space, it's always, who owns the client? It's always confusing. The broker thinks they own it. The lender thinks they own it. The brokerage thinks they own the client because they're ultimately responsible from a compliance angle. And I think everyone does in some sense, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of the client's decision. No one owns that person. That doesn't really make too much sense. It's a relationship that you want to have. At least own the data, have control over the data that you need to enable those relationships. So, that's the first part, the data side of things. And then on the feature side of things, I would say look for open systems. right? Because again, I don't know what's coming. Who knows what's coming? Could be a crazy new tool that we could never even conceptualize. So I'm not going to say, yes, use Blue because for sure we're going to be ready for that. I hope we are, and we're planning to be, but I can't put my rubber stamp on it because I don't know what's coming. But I can say with Blue, and I'd say for any other system that you're looking at, make sure they have open APIs, methods in which to interact with these external tools, because we don't know what's coming. And you want to at least be nimble, right? Agile, so that, hey, when they do come, hey, I can quickly build an integration and it's in my system and I'm ready to go. If you have a closed system, then, hey, the only way to use kind of these new, I guess, AI tools is to switch systems. And again, you're spending all this time switching systems when the person who used an open system is already using these great innovations. So to summarize, clean data that you own and systems that have open APIs, open frameworks that you can integrate with.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, I even think about our own technology stack that we built over time. It's probably important to note we're on Salesforce as a CRM today.
Yeah.
Part of the reason that we made that decision, it was just the flexibility and the ability for it to be an open system and for us to basically plug in anything that we want into that CRM to make it work for us. And so many people build for Salesforce or build with Salesforce in mind, right?
Yeah.
It's like I'm building an independent platform, and my next logical step as a technologist or developer, et cetera, is to then make sure that it can be used in Salesforce. The next thing that people typically do when they're building is they build a Salesforce plugin immediately after.
Yes.
And what we have found is that allows us to be quite nimble because, trying to build a hard-coded platform, it's very, very difficult to see that far out into the future to know everything that's going to be needed. And companies are just moving at such a fast rate in terms of their development, especially you mentioned data, like data infrastructure. Like I think we're on our third, data product now because it was like, 5 years ago, it was like you need this. And then it's like, oh, you need this. And now it's like that. And then, AWS has like a new tool seemingly every like quarter that they roll out. They're like, oh, you don't need any of these three things anymore. We just boxed it right here and it's out of the box. And it's just like a simple little SaaS product. And we charge you based on your data usage. And it just keeps moving along. And we're like, oh man, if we had spent all this time and energy building our own database as opposed to something that is more similar to like an operational data store, that's just like, hey, like we just need a single place that just like holds the data. And then we can move that data around. And we can make that data populate anywhere we want based on the way that these other systems are flowing. So in some ways, like the technology story of our business, we accidentally made ourselves dynamic because we were trying to get to market fast. But in reflection, it probably was the right decision because I would look at other people's systems at times and I would get jealous. I'm like, oh, we should have just built that.
So shiny and new. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so shiny and new. They've got all their branding all over it. But then you fast forward 2-3 years, the management of the code base becomes a heavy cost on the business. And you're like, oh man, like all this new technology is coming out. We can't use any of it because we're on this. And that's a lot of times what's happened with the banks, for example. Like people are like, why can't the banks just move faster and just implement all this new technology stack? Is hard coded, 25 years old. You can't just rip and replace. Everything's connected in and around those systems.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we've done migrations of, an organization of 10 people, and it takes months to move them from system A to system B. You imagine a bank to do that. It's crazy. But I mean, to your point, I mean, absolutely. I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning, but BluMortgage is actually built on Zoho. I don't know if you're familiar with that platform, but okay. So it's competitor to Salesforce, but it's very much so something that we thought about too, to say, hey, stay up to date, to have the DevOps to constantly be building to, new user expectations and new technologies. It's huge. And they invest billions and billions of dollars. I just talked to a broker just last week, but it's a conversation I've had many times where they say, I don't use any of these, CRMs that are made specifically for the mortgage industry because I did that before. And then 10 years later, I have this thing that looks completely out of date that I can't use and it's not very useful. So I want to use, something like a Salesforce or something like a Zoho because literally every year they're spending billions and billions of dollars keeping up with it. And to your point, they have the, developer community, which my bold prediction, I guess, if we're making those, I think this concept of the developer community is going to increase much more just across all tech. Now we're kind of getting outside mortgage tech, but all tech into the future, because the cost to develop is going to go down, right? With AI tools, with these things like Copilot, which is Microsoft's AI tool to help you code, they say, hey, we can double your coding speed, right? So just by that, if everyone who's using GitHub is now using Copilot and can double their coding speed, well, now we're getting double the apps, or the cost to develop has just halved, right? Something like that. And so, the opportunity for these developers to build these add-ons and build these tools, I think is just going to explode. And I think that's going to be great for developers. And I think that's going to be, great for users too. I think we're going to see both sides of that.
I agree. I think that the future is actually much more low code, no code.
Yeah.
Than the current state. If I'm making a prediction, since you made one, I will as well.
Yeah,
I think
here we go. Yeah.
I think each day we inch toward a future that is less code and more low code, no code. Things start to look a lot more drag and drop. Even CRMs, it's like, I want the birthday email to go out to these clients. You mentioned, keeping clean data in a clean database. Like when I think about those things, like what are we really talking about? For most people, it's just client name, email, phone number. You said birth date being one, but like maturity date, current interest rate, current balance, things like that.
Lender, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Like just that alone, if I could then automate a system just in a drag and drop fashion without having to, hire a bunch of developers to make it happen, every time, a client, like current rates are 2% or something below the client's current rate, I want that client to get a text message. Or I want that client to get an email or whatever that thing is. Or if I have a portal, I want it to populate another portal that, hey, you should probably reconsider your options at this time or something like that. Like to me, that is what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about CRM, not as rigid and sticky as it is today, but something that is more dynamic and has the ability to leverage AI to think a bit on its own and make some decisions about some opportunities to reach out. And I think there is a whole other version of AI that's further out, but I think there's a more short-term version that's actually very close to available today, if not already available today, that some people are starting to leverage. And I do think in the next few years, we'll start to see some people pull away because they're just moving faster because they're just leveraging the tools that are there, and they don't have to spend millions or tens of millions of dollars to try to pull that off.
The advice I hear, and it's the one I give now, which I think is right, which is, it's not going to be AI that replaces brokers. It's going to be the brokers that are using AI will replace brokers who are not using it. Right. And I think that, to your point about the no code stuff, I think, that's always been the story of technology forever. Like if you go back however many years, it was like, the zeros and ones, right? That was the most basic coding. And then we abstracted a layer up to say, okay, well, we're going to have C++, which is a baseline. Then we're going to have command line. Then we're going to have JavaScript, and then have all these layers going up and up. And so what you're basically doing with each layer is you're connecting basically the computer to humans and how humans think and humans interact. And if you think about AI and these natural language processing generative AIs, that could be the final layer, because ultimately that's really how humans talk and think, right? Is through language, right? And so these AI tools, if we can speak to them, like literally how we're talking here, like if you could just talk to an AI and say, yeah, hey, anybody who has a rate under 2%, whenever it gets there, just send them an email. That's how we think. That's how we talk. And if there can be that layer that they can translate that to code, that can then translate that into a CRM, and then all the way down that line, so the computer's just doing it. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Picture an AI on the other side, just thanks, Tom. Consider it done.
No
pushback. That's the CRM.
Is that your dream? Do you get a lot of pushback? Or what? What's going on here?
Perhaps, right? Trying to wrangle together agents to say, like, this is the process, right? Like, this is the way. We know the challenges. I saw some data that suggested this was specific to the real estate industry. A gentleman named Mike Delpretti from the U.S. ran some tests and did a bunch of online forms for real estate, which created real estate leads. And only 50% of the time were they actually contacted by any real estate agent. And I'm just picturing like the layer of management who's saying like, hey, we're sending you all these leads. Can you just call them like pretty please?
Yeah.
The client gave you name, email, phone number, and consented to be contacted and said that they were interested in properties in this area, things that most would kill for.
Yeah.
But if there isn't a lot of structure around that and these things aren't automated in some way, people just get busy and they slip. So part of my obsessions with people and how they relate to their CRMs, and the reason that I wanted to talk to you today, which I think has made for an awesome conversation. So maybe to wrap things up on this side a little bit, I am curious about what is next for you and Massimo and team at Blue, and some of what we can look forward to in 2025 and beyond, and some of the legacy and impact that you guys want to have on, a really exciting industry as I see it.
Sure. Yeah, big question there. But at the end of the day, I always, maybe this goes back to my engineering days, but for me personally, maybe I'll start there, is I always want to be a builder. I think that's where I'm, I guess happiest, if you will, but also I think where I can find a lot of success. And, building's one of those things which is great, because if you build something useful, then other people want to use it too, and makes their life easier. So I think that's kind of my North Star. So when you talk about maybe even beyond 2025, we always want to be building. And, obviously based on this conversation, there's a ton of new tools that are coming to market, and with new tools means maybe new things to be able to build. So that very much so excites me. More immediate term in terms of Blue and me and Massimo and what we're up to, I mean, it's really not too different, that vision. This is an exciting industry for sure. I think it's been a tough couple of years for some brokers out there, but I think that we're starting to enter a time where a combination of both these tech tools and just with the market and a lot of renewals coming up, I think the next few years are going to be, turning the corner for a lot of people. And we want to be there to serve them. And ultimately, when we serve our clients, they serve us. We learn a bunch from them, and we get smarter, and we get to build a better product out of that. So I think we'll just kind of continue doing that, and a lot of hope for 2025 with some of the things that we're seeing.
That's awesome. I said that was the last question. I'm going to pin you for one more.
Okay.
Is there anything exciting that we should look for from Blue in 2025? Anything new coming that would excite us?
In terms of features and that sort of thing? I don't know if I have anything super specific for you. I think we want to find, the right AI tool to use. I think that obviously is what a lot of people are asking for. I think there is a lot of opportunity there. For us, it's just navigating. We don't want to hitch our wagon to a horse that becomes the lame horse within 6 months, right? So, we're very curious, and we're very kind of have our ears to the ground of some of these new AI tools. It's just finding the right one, I think, for us. So I think that's what it'll be, but specific wise, I would say TBD, but honestly, because it's TBD in our mind too, is finding the right horse to hitch our wagon to, so to speak.
All right. So I'm going to put you on the record. It's likely AI, but it's also TBD. That's exciting.
Lots of acronyms. Yeah.
You sound like everybody right now, which is like, it's AI, not sure how, but it's coming.
Yes, somehow, please. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for being on with me, Tom. I appreciate you joining me. It's a good conversation. Appreciate it.
This was great. Awesome. Thank you.